Okay, so sourdough, I mean, there's just something about it, right? That tangy, chewy goodness. It's addictive, but it all starts with the levain.
It really does, the Levain, the starter, it's like the heart of sourdough.
It is. And today we're diving deep into this world. We'll be exploring its history, the science, even the artistry of it.
Think of it as a journey. We'll uncover what Levain really is, why it's been so important, and what you need to know if you want to work with it.
We want to demystify it, make it approachable. Because let's face it, sourdough isn't just another type of bread. It's a connection to, well, thousands of years of baking tradition, a blend of science and culinary skill.
It really is a fascinating intersection of, yeah, science and art.
Okay, so let's get to it. Where did this whole idea of using a levain even begin?
Well, we have to go way back to the Fertile Crescent, about 6,000 years ago. That's where we see the beginnings of naturally leavened bread.
Wow, 6,000 years. That's incredible.
It is, and it wasn't a planned thing. Imagine early bakers. They leave dough out and boom, it ferments. They discovered this lighter, more flavorful bread totally by accident.
A happy accident, you could say.
Right, and a huge turning point, this accidental fermentation led to a more digestible and nutritious food source.
So no little packets of yeast back then.
Nope, nothing like the commercial yeast we have today.
So what's the difference, really?
Well, commercial yeast is a single cultivated strain, bred for consistent and fast fermentation. Levain, on the other hand, is a whole community, a diverse mix of wild yeasts and bacteria living and working together.
A little world within the dough.
Exactly. A symbiotic culture, you could say. They coexist and actually help each other thrive within the Levain.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk history. Ancient Egypt. That's where we find the first real evidence of sourdough, isn't it?
It is, yes. Egyptian bakers, they noticed that dough left out would rise and develop this distinct flavor.
So they were onto something.
They were, and this unintentional fermentation, that was the beginning of what we now know as levain.
A transformative moment in bread making history.
Oh, absolutely. It led to bread that was lighter and had a much more appealing flavor.
And then the Romans, they took it to another level, right?
Oh, they did. They did. They were incredibly skilled bakers. The Romans refined sourdough techniques. They even developed a whole classification system for different types of sourdough bread.
Wow, a classification system.
It really shows how deep their understanding and appreciation for sourdough was. Bread wasn't just food for them, it was woven into their culture.
It makes you wonder, what were those classifications based on? The texture, the flavor, the grains used.
Right. It's fascinating to think about.
It is. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. What about the Middle Ages? What was happening with sourdough then?
Well, through the Middle Ages, sourdough was still the primary way bread was made throughout Europe.
So it was going strong.
It was, and during this time, we start to see regional flavor profiles develop. Each region had its own unique mix of wild yeasts and bacteria.
Ah, so the environment played a role.
Exactly. Plus, the types of quains they used varied, so each region's levain had its own distinct microbial fingerprint, kind of like wine.
Love that analogy, a microbial fingerprint.
It really captures the idea.
Now, jumping across the Atlantic to the California Gold Rush, San Francisco and sourdough, they're kind of inseparable, aren't they?
You're right. The gold rush of 1849 was a big moment for sourdough in America. Prospectors brought their starters with them as they headed west.
So it traveled with them.
It did, and San Francisco became famous for its sourdough. It's all thanks to those unique strains of yeast and bacteria in the Bay Area's climate.
So even today, San Francisco sourdough has a specific character.
It does, yeah. Those prospectors were carrying little bits of baking tradition with them across the continent.
That's amazing. Okay, we've covered history. Now let's dive into the science behind it all. You called Levain a dynamic ecosystem, which sounds way more complex than just flour and water.
It is. It really is. Think of it as a bustling city of microbes. You've got wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria all working together.
Okay, break it down for us.
Sure. So the wild yeasts, they feed on the carbs in the flour. That process creates carbon dioxide, which makes the bread rise, and a bit of ethanol, too.
Makes sense. And the bacteria.
They're producing organic acids, like lactic acid, which gives sourdough that tangy flavor we love, and acetic acid for a more complex aroma.
So it's a balance.
Yes, the yeast making the bread rise, the bacteria giving it the flavor. It's a beautiful example of microbial cooperation.
A whole orchestra of flavors. And you said the flavor can change based on what you feed it and where it's located. How does that work?
Well, different flours have different nutrients, right? So they'll feed the microbes in different ways. Even the minerals in your water can affect things. And the air, it's full of wild yeast and bacteria, so a levain can absorb these over time.
So it adapts to its environment.
Exactly. It develops a unique character, different from one started elsewhere, even with the same ingredients. It's like it develops its own terroir, like wine.
That is mind-blowing. And we talked about the health benefits, too. Tell us more about that.
Sure, so that long fermentation process, it has some perks. The microbes produce enzymes that break down gluten. This makes sourdough easier to digest for some people with gluten sensitivities, but it's important to note it's still not safe for those with celiac disease.
Got it.
Also, fermentation lowers phytic acid. It's a compound in grains that blocks mineral absorption, so sourdough can be more nutritious.
The bonus. So for someone listening who's now thinking, I gotta try this, what are the key tips for creating and maintaining a healthy levain?
Well, flour choice is key, especially when you're starting out. Whole grain flours like rye or whole wheat are great. They're packed with nutrients those microbes need to flourish.
So skip the white flour at first?
Yeah, generally. Once your levain is active and stable, you can experiment more. Water quality matters too. Filtered or bottled water is best.
Why is that?
Chlorine in tap water can mess with the microbes. You want to encourage their growth, not inhibit it.
It's about creating the right environment.
Exactly. And feeding is crucial. You want to keep that levain active. Typically, you'd feed it every 12 to 24 hours.
That's the general rule?
Yeah, but the ideal schedule, it depends on the temperature, where you are, and how active your starter is. Warmth speeds things up, cooler temperatures slow things down.
So you have to pay attention.
You do. You learn to read your levain, see how it rises and falls after feeding. You build a relationship with it.
It's a partnership.
It is, and temperature, that plays a big role. Ideally, you want a consistent temperature between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit.
That sweet spot for those microbes.
Yeah, too cold, and they slow down, too hot, and it can encourage the wrong kinds of microbes.
So consistent warmth equals happy microbes. Speaking of people who know their microbes, there are some big names in the world of sourdough. Who are some of those key figures?
Oh, there are some real pioneers. Chad Robertson, for example, from Tartine Bakery in San Francisco. He's known for his meticulous techniques and his understanding of fermentation.
Tartine, their loaves are legendary.
They are. And Nancy Silverton, she's another big name, a real champion of the artisan bread movement.
What's her contribution?
She's been huge in emphasizing high-quality ingredients and that slow, patient fermentation. She really elevated the craft of bread baking.
Amazing. Now let's have some fun. Quirky sourdough facts. Tell me about the space bread.
Oh yes, in 2019, sourdough became the first bread baked in space on the International Space Station.
Really?
Yeah, they even designed a special oven for it. It shows how important bread and the process of making it really is to us.
Space bread, that's a great story. And what about the East Passport?
Ah, yes. It's a fun way to think about it. Every sourdough starter, it develops in its own environment. It collects the local yeasts and bacteria.
And adapts to its surroundings.
Exactly. So it carries this unique microbial profile, a signature like a passport of its home.
A lovely way to think about it. Okay, let's do a quick timeline just to recap sourdough's long journey.
All right. Around 6000 BCE, we see the first evidence of sourdough in Egypt.
That's the starting point.
It is. Then around 100 BCE, Roman bakers are making big advancements.
Refining the craft.
Yes. Through the Middle Ages, sourdough becomes a staple throughout Europe.
And then it hops the pond.
Right. 1849, the gold rush popularizes sourdough in America.
Then we get to the 20th century.
And that's when the artisan bread movement takes off, reviving interest in sourdough.
And today, it's everywhere.
It is. From news bakeries to mainstream.
What a journey. From an accidental discovery to a global phenomenon, even going into space. So what's the main takeaway you hope people get from all this?
I think it's that mastering Levain isn't just about following a recipe. It's about science. It's about intuition. It's about patience. It's about understanding this living culture and using that knowledge to create something delicious and unique.
Absolutely. It's a partnership with those microbes. So we've covered the history, the science, the essential tips for caring for your own starter.
We've seen how this ancient method has not only survived, but thrived.
And here's a final thought. If you decide to dive into sourdough, the Levain you create will be uniquely yours. Shaped by your environment, your ingredients, your own way of doing things. A connection to centuries of tradition and the amazing world of microbes all around us. And if you want to learn more, if you're eager to explore techniques, recipes, the ongoing story of sourdough, well, there's a whole world out there waiting for you. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time.
See you then.